The Darksaber, one of the most ancient, iconic, and powerful weapons in all of Star Wars. A weapon that was passed down for generations, symbolizing strength and honor in the Mandalorian culture. But just how many people wielded it? Well, in this video, we're going to break down each and every owner of the Darksaber, and let's just say there's more people than you think. So let's get right into it. Tar Vizla. As for our very first owner of the Darksaber, this was none other than Tar Vizla, the creator of it. However, his story is pretty interesting. Vizsla was actually born a Mandalorian, but soon he was discovered to be Force sensitive. So because of this, he was brought into the Jedi Order as a young child, which made him the very first Mandalorian Jedi. After years and years as a Jedi, Vizsla soon worked his way up to becoming a Jedi Knight, where it was there he forged the Darksaber. He created this saber to be one of a kind, as unlike other Jedi, this saber had a black blade and a hilt made out of Beskar material. Nobody had ever seen anything like this before, and Vizsla really made a name for himself with this weapon. However, not long after he completed his Jedi training, Vizsla actually returned to his homeworld of Mandalore. From there, he wielded the Darksaber and used the weapon to unite both the Mandalorians and Jedi together. Safe to say it worked, as he even became the new ruler of Mandalore and proclaimed this weapon as a symbol of leadership. From that day forward, whoever owned the Darksaber was the ruler of Mandalore, and that was the new honorary tradition, all thanks to him. However, although Vizsla was the one who built this saber, things would soon take a turn. Years later, when Vizsla died, the Darksaber wasn't passed down to the next Mandalorian like he hoped. Instead, the Jedi Order claimed it as their own and stored it inside the Jedi Temple where it was stashed away for years. Because of this, it seemed like the Darksaber would never be in the hands of the Mandalorian people ever again, until one day something crazy happened. House Vizsla. Years later after Vizsla's death, members of his house, House Vizsla, decided to reclaim the Darksaber back. So to do this, his people broke into the Jedi Temple and seized the weapon. From there, it was reunited with the Mandalorians once again, and truly became a symbol of their heritage. With that, the weapon then belonged to House Vizsla and was passed down over generations within the family. Each wielder who used it was able to assert dominance, strike down adversaries, and most of all, rule Mandalore. In time even, the Darksaber also began to make a name for itself across the galaxy. Soon, it became associated with the Mandalorians' leadership and might, and a lot of people knew to respect it. This weapon wasn't just any ordinary saber, but instead it represented the Mandalorians' warrior culture that was all about valuing honor, combat, and legacy. Pre Vizsla. Like we just mentioned, the Darksaber was passed down through the Vizsla family for years until it eventually reached the hands of Pre Vizsla, an ancient ancestor to Tar Vizla. Pre Vizsla inherited the Darksaber around the time of the Clone Wars and was the leader and founder of a group called Death Watch. Death Watch was a terrorist organization that he created and was dedicated to restoring Mandalore's warrior culture. See, at this point of the timeline, Mandalore was being ruled by a duchess named Satine Kryze, and she didn't believe in war or violence. She only wanted peace, and well, a lot of Mandalorians didn't like that. To them, war and combat was part of who they were, so that's why Death Watch was formed, to bring back those traditions. So, Vizsla not only led this group, but he carried the Darksaber, which symbolized his authority and his challenge to the current pacifist rule. He used the saber in countless battles, and even fought up against many Jedi, like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Ahsoka Tano. It's safe to say that he was pretty successful with it too, but one day, things would take a turn for him. After being in league with the former Sith, Darth Maul, Maul challenged him for leadership of Mandalore. See, in order to wield the Darksaber, it had to be won in combat, so if Maul beat him, the Darksaber would then belong to him, and he'd be the new ruler of Mandalore. Fortunately for him, it worked, and everything went according to his plan. He not only beat Vizsla, but killed them as well, and claimed the Darksaber as his own. Now you're probably wondering though, didn't all the Vizslas just pass it down for centuries within their family? Well, while we have no confirmation, many assume that just like Maul, each member of the Vizsla family also had to win the saber in combat. Mandalorian culture has always been warrior-like, so I have no doubt that even if it's family, they had to battle it out to wield it. Regardless though, now it was in Maul's hands, and let's just say Mandalore would never be the same from that day on. Darth Maul. After killing Pre Vizsla, Maul became the first outsider to ever rule Mandalore, and a lot of people didn't like that. So, instead of following his leadership, many Mandalorians like Bo-Katan and Kryze turned against Maul and formed their own groups as they refused to serve him. As for Maul though, he had a lot of success with the Darksaber throughout this time. Not only was he a skilled warrior, but he blended his abilities in the dark side to really take control of this blade. He used it in tons of pivotal battles, and even racked up a few kills with it as well, including Duchess Satine herself. However, things would eventually change when he one day fought up against his old master, Darth Sidious. In their duel, Maul fought using his normal red saber along with the Darksaber, and well, he stood no chance. Sidious killed his brother Savage Opress in cold blood and defeated Maul and tortured him. Although Maul was able to eventually escape and recover from that loss, he never used the Darksaber ever again from that day on. Now, although it's not confirmed, many think that he stopped using it because of all the pain it brought him that night. After watching his brother die in his arms and losing to his old master, it could be that he associated the saber with those tragic events. So, Maul kept the saber stashed away for many, many years, all on the planet of Dathomir, his home planet. That was until one day it was discovered by a Mandalorian named Sabine Wren. Sabine Wren. We fast forward 20 years later to the year 2 BBY. Now at this point of the timeline, the Empire was in power, and Mandalore sadly wasn't the planet it used to be. The planet was now under the Empire's rule, and it really wasn't the same thriving warrior culture it once was. However, luckily things were headed in the right direction. Kind of. Around this time, the Mandalorian named Sabine Wren discovered the Darksaber where it was stashed inside a lair on Dathomir. At first though, she was hesitant to wield it because of the heavy responsibilities it carried and how much it weighed physically. See, the Darksaber worked differently than a normal saber. When using this weapon, your mind and body always had to be sharp, otherwise the saber wouldn't work for you. If you were ever emotionally conflicted, scared, or even nervous, the saber would just feel heavy, and so Sabine struggled with it. In time though, she trained under the Jedi Knight Kanan Jarrus, and he taught her how to master it. From there, Sabine used it in multiple battles, and even was victorious at times. However, she wouldn't have it for long. See, Sabine understood what wielding that saber meant, and she knew that it meant being the leader of Mandalore, so she eventually gave it up. Instead, she offered it to Bo-Katan Kryze, as she thought that Bo-Katan was more fit to rule Mandalore, and the Mandalorians would be in better hands under her rule. Now, although Sabine's time with the Darksaber was short, she did a lot of good during her time with it, and even used it to unite several Mandalorian clans together. From that day forward though, it was Bo-Katan who was the new wielder of the Darksaber. But let's just say, this was a big mistake. Bo-Katan Kryze. Once Sabine gave Bo-Katan the Darksaber, she became the new Mandalorian leader, and while she did some good with it, there was one problem. Remember how I mentioned earlier that the only way to wield the Darksaber was to win it through combat? Well, it said that if you accept the saber as just a gift like what Bo-Katan did, you would be cursed. Let's just say that ended up being true. As wielder of the Darksaber, Bo-Katan was able to unite a lot of her people together, and led them all up until the Empire finally collapsed in the year 4 ABY. At that point, Palpatine died, Vader saved Luke, and the second Death Star was destroyed. For most of the galaxy, it seemed like peace was finally restored, but not for the Mandalorians. Not long after those events, an ex-Imperial officer named Moff Gideon used all his remaining forces to bomb Mandalore. With that, he and his forces destroyed the planet to ruins, and thousands of Mandalorians died that very night. This tragic event was known as the Night of a Thousand Tears, and is arguably the most devastating moment in Mandalorian history. Sadly though, it didn't stop there. On top of that, Bo-Katan also lost control of the Darksaber, and so Moff Gideon became the new wielder of it. Moff Gideon. After defeating Bo-Katan and destroying Mandalore, Gideon kept the Darksaber as a trophy. His main goal was to wipe out the Mandalorian population, and for the most part he succeeded. So he held the Darksaber and used it to symbol his authority over all remnants of the Empire. Although the Empire was technically gone since Palpatine died, there were still many remnants spread across the galaxy, and he commanded them. Eventually though, his rule with the Darksaber would come to an end. After capturing the high-level target Grogu, he was faced to enter a 1v1 duel against a Mandalorian, Djarin. Din used the Beskar spear while Gideon used the Darksaber, but it wasn't enough. Although Gideon was strong, Din was trained as a Mandalorian, which as we know are some of the most skilled warriors in the galaxy. So in time, Din was able to best him in combat, and he became the new wielder of the Darksaber. Djarin. Djarin was born years ago before the Clone Wars, and was rescued as a child by the group Death Watch. From there, he was brought into their clan and grew up as a Mandalorian. So while he technically wasn't born a Mandalorian, he was brought in at a young age, and they were his family. As he got older though, and the Empire finally collapsed, Din started making his name as a bounty hunter, and in time his paths crossed with Moff Gideon, who he defeated. Now at the time, Din had no idea what came with wielding the Darksaber, nor did he care. At first, he even tried giving it to Bo-Katan, but after seeing what happened the last time she accepted the saber, she refused his offer. So, Din was kinda stuck with the saber now, and he had no other option but to train with it. At first, he struggled a lot to use it, mainly because of his mixed emotions, but in time he was able to learn a bit of proper technique and his skills got a bit better. Eventually though, his journey with the Darksaber would soon come to an end. One day when returning to Mandalore, he was captured by a droid-like beast called the Spider Tank. This droid captured Din, and sadly he lost the Darksaber to it. So out of all people, Bo-Katan herself used the saber to rescue Din, and she slayed the Spider Tank. With that, Bo-Katan proved that she was able to defeat the foe who defeated Din, so technically the saber belonged to her once more. Now she actually earned the Darksaber, and because it wasn't gifted to her, she finally accepted the blade. Bo-Katan Kryze. After reclaiming the Darksaber once more, Bo-Katan used it to regain control of Mandalore. At this point, Moff Gideon was still around, and he wanted to accomplish the same thing he did years ago, and that was to destroy any surviving Mandalorians again. However, Bo-Katan refused to go down without a fight. So, using the Darksaber, she united several Mandalorian clans across the galaxy, and joined forces all together to take down Gideon for good. In time, she even entered a rematch against Gideon, and the two went head to head. That was until something crazy happened. Out of nowhere, Gideon was able to crush the Darksaber hilt out of her hands, all because of his strength-enhancing armor. With that, the Darksaber was destroyed, and from that day on, it was no more. Luckily though, Bo, Din, and the rest were still able to defeat Gideon for good even without the blade, and that was truly the end of Moff Gideon. Now, although the Darksaber was destroyed, its symbolic importance remained intact and still carried on. While the weapon itself was gone, the legacy it represented could never be destroyed, so Bo-Katan was able to lead her people once more even without the saber. Because of her leadership, peace was finally restored to Mandalore for the first time in ages, and now the Mandalorians could start rebuilding. With that though, that concludes our list of every single owner of the Darksaber. But I want to know from you, what would you rather wield? The Darksaber or a normal lightsaber? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you always.